Hi everyone, welcome to the Deep Psychology Podcast. I'm Ross Edwards, and we're continuing on with our February series on the big metaphysical, epistemological, ontological questions of life. And it's not getting any easier, folks. This week we're tackling the question, is the universe physical? So is the universe physical? Well, it's not just going to be a short, easy answer, I'm afraid. And I'm not here to offer clear answers. I mean, listen, I'm not going to hold anything back. I'm not going to hold my opinions back. But I don't want you to take them as answers. I want you to take them as an opinion, one that you might think is informed, one you might think is wildly misinformed. You know, I don't really care if you agree with me on all my points, but I just want you to encourage questioning. I want to encourage you to question these things for yourself and to really ask, is the world physical? What does that even mean? You know, if I say the world is physical, what does that mean? What does it mean for something to be physical? What does it mean for something not to be physical? You know, and I don't want to shove questions in your head either, because that would ruin the process. I want you to be curious, okay? So I'm going to give you a lot of opinions here, and they are opinions, they're grounded in knowledge and practice and study and, factual information and so on, but I don't have the answers to these things. These are very difficult questions, and the truth behind them is actually something that's very difficult to express. So the reason I'm saying this is because often people ask these questions wanting to know the answer as if somebody knew the answer. And I think it's a grave misunderstanding and a grave misconception to think that someone would have the answer to these things. Because these are just like the foundation of life, and life is very mysterious and paradoxical, and at some point it becomes incomprehensible. So what are we talking about with this question? Let's look at the question itself. Is the universe physical? This is a question that, it really informs most of science. It informs a lot of a huge chunk of philosophy. It informs a lot of armchair philosophy. It informs a lot of informal philosophy. And it's so fundamental because it's not that the answer changes how we live it's not that the answer changes our experience of life, but it's that this question underlies our experience of life very much, because the question of physicality underlies the most mundane daily acts. And it is such a fundamental question. The basic paradigm that people have when it comes to life being physical is, well, first of all, it is physical. But what does that mean? The basic paradigm is that the world consists of hard, solid matter that extends endlessly in all directions, separated by empty space. What do I mean by that? I sort of mean, right now, if you've got your eyes open and you're looking around you, you can see solid objects, right? You can maybe see the walls in your house, you can maybe see doors, you can maybe see surfaces, or if you're outside, you can see the street, you can see trees, you can see the grass, people. Okay, these are solid objects, what we call solid matter. It's not just that, it's that those objects are separated by space, so they're clearly limited. A door starts at one side and ends at the other side, and it's got a clear delineation. And between the door and the window, there's a clear space that's completely empty, and the objects themselves are not empty. And this extends endlessly. So, well, the universe isn't literally endless as far as we know, but I'm using this in a sort of metaphorical way. I mean endlessly in that as far as your visual field extends, and as far as you can imagine outside your visual field, you have this sense that the world is physical, that it's physical objects separated by space. Physical objects can mean anything from a pen to an entire street. It's just physical matter, and it's separated out by air and so on. So that's the basic paradigm. Now, obviously, I'm going to question this paradigm because if I wasn't, I probably wouldn't be doing this episode, right? And my basic conclusion is not as simple as that. But I'm not, for one thing, I'm not just going to throw the paradigm under a bus. I will a little bit, but I'm not completely, because it exists. This paradigm exists for a reason, and it has validity to it. However, there's some very serious problems with it, and there's three. This is a very good segue. I'm proud of this one. There's three very simple problems with this paradigm. Think of this as like my introductory critique of this paradigm. First of all, we covered this last week, spent an hour talking about this last week. If you want, go back and find the episode that I did last week on does an external world exist. My main conclusion there, and this is my first problem with this sort of materialistic paradigm that we tend to hold, is that you cannot actually prove an external world exists. It is an assumption that you make about your experience. Present experience is all there is, right? And then the idea of there being something external to what you're experiencing right now is simply an idea within your current experience, right? So when we say, and obviously often we don't say this, but this is how we conceptualize the world often, we think of it as beyond our visual field, beyond what we're currently experiencing. It's not only that there's something beyond that, is that something is matter, and it's solid and it's stable and all the rest of it. It's like this endlessly extending kind of physical world beyond what we're currently experiencing. If you can't prove that external world exists, then you can prove even less that external world is solid, right? That's the first problem. The second problem, and this comes from fairly modern physics, not super modern, but it's pretty modern. It's certainly more modern than Newtonian physics. Is that when you analyze the atomic structure of physical matter, and when I say physical matter, I just mean the floor, the ceiling, the surfaces, the objects around you, just everything that seems physical to you. When you analyze, and even your own body and your brain and everything that's made of physical matter, quote unquote, when you analyze that at an atomic level, at a scale that is sufficiently small, you realize that it is 99.99999, I don't know how many nines it is, but 5 or 6 nines after the decimal, empty space. Only a tiny percentage of physical matter is actually physical in the way that we think it is. And I don't mean it's empty space in that it's like air, it's filled with air like a balloon. No, it's absolutely empty. It's literally between, the space between everything we call matter is completely empty. If it wasn't empty, there would be matter there, and it wouldn't be empty space. It's completely empty, right? So whenever you're looking at a door, that is mostly empty space. Obviously, you don't see it like that, but the fact of it is that on an atomic level, it's 99.99999% empty space. Just to say, I'm not going to say the nines right every time, and I don't think it's that important for this purpose. I can just say it's so close to being pure empty space. Not aired, absolute empty space. So, well, that's a huge point. I'm not going to go into that right now because I could talk about that specific point for quite a while. But clearly that presents a problem for our materialistic paradigm. Third, when you dream at night, the dream world seems physical to you. You know, when you're dreaming about being with your friends, or you're dreaming about, I don't know, something that happened in your past, you've got a surround, an environment around you. You know, the dream takes place in a certain environment. It might be the street you grew up in. It might be a place you've never been to before. But, you know, it looks like a physical world. It looks like the ordinary world. And it feels that way in the dream. When you're dreaming, you don't fucking realize that you're dreaming. It feels like you're in waking life. And it feels physical. What's my point? That clearly physicality isn't an absolute thing. You know, if it can feel like our dreams are physical when we're dreaming, then clearly something is up here. You know, it's not as absolute as we think it is. If literally we can sort of construct physicality in our dreams when there is no physicality in terms of, you know, the world, the waking 3D world. That physicality is gone. And yet when we're dreaming, it feels like we're in a physical world. So clearly there's something not quite right there. And I'm not sure what the answer is to that, actually, but it just shows you what our nervous system is capable of. And it's kind of like, well, if our nervous system can do that when we're dreaming, it can literally construct a physical world from nowhere for an hour or 2 hours, however long we're dreaming at night. What can it fucking do when we're waking and we're actually in what we think is a real world? Again, I'm not saying I have the answer to this. It's a very difficult question to answer. I'm just saying, look how problematic it is, folks, to say that physicality, you know, that the world is physical and it's stable and it's real and all the rest of it. It's a very slippery thing, okay? And these 3 points, the first one being, you cannot prove an external world exists, as I talked about last week in a lot of detail. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please listen to that episode. The second point, that matter, what we call physical matter, is actually 99.999% empty space, with more nines probably. And that when you dream at night, the dream feels physical to you. You put those 3 together and you realize that this physical thing isn't so clear cut after all. What the hell does physicality mean? And what the hell does the world is physical and the physical world extends endlessly around me? What does that mean? You know, and that's what I'm getting at today. I'm exploring the intricacies of all this, because even when we look at 3 basic critiques like that, it shows you that it's not as cut and dried as it usually seems when we're living our life. So I've kind of given like a critique of our usual paradigm. Now I'm going to not necessarily support it or advocate for it. I suppose I am playing devil's advocate a little bit, but I'm going to say what we can undoubtedly say beyond having to fully buy into materialism. So, you know, what I'm more asking the question, why do we believe in this paradigm? Because there is a reason for it. There's actually many reasons, and I've got a whole list here. First of all, the world certainly behaves as though it were physical. You know, if I'm drinking a cup of coffee, I know that if I rest it on the table, it's going to just sit there. It's not going to move, you know, unless I kick the table. It's not going to move, right? For example, and it's not going to like sink through the table. Another example, you know, if you touch a wall, that your hand's not going to like go through the wall, and the wall's not just going to like change shape, and it's not going to suddenly behave like a wave or something like that. It's not, you know, it's solid matter. You know, you could punch the wall. Please don't do that. But you could punch the wall, and unless you're really, really strong, the wall's not going to move. You know, the most sort of far out spiritual New Age people, if you ask them to punch a wall, they would probably retract and say, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to hurt myself, right? So the world does behave physically. You know, as much as we want to deny physicality, it behaves physically, right? If you tried to walk through your front door without opening it, well, you're not going to get out. You're never going to leave your house if you never literally open the door. You need to open the thing because it's physical, or at least it behaves as physical matter should behave according to our paradigms. Okay? So clearly that the basic experiential evidence is that, things have edges to them. Things have matter. Things have a mass to them, whether or not we believe it, right? That's an undeniable experiential fact. And it's a good thing. It's a good idea to treat our world as a physical world. Why? Well, to give a kind of stupid example, but it's just to show you how stark and obvious what I'm saying is. For example, right, if you wanted to walk out your front door and you decided, I know, today I'm not going to get my keys and open the front door like a normal person and walk out and then close it again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and run. I'm going to run from one end of the corridor to the other, and I'm going to see if I can run through the front door. Right? What do you think would happen? Well, hopefully you would have a reflex reaction before you got to the front door. In the worst case scenario, you could probably end up in hospital with like serious concussion and a terrible, injury of some degree, right? Because if you just treat the world as this non-physical thing that has no rules to it, you're not going to get very far. Like, and you could seriously hurt yourself. Look at young children who don't know basic facts about the world, and they don't understand like things like heat and cold and sharp, an object being sharp. They don't understand things like, on the road, you don't want to step out onto the road because you can get hit over by a car that weighs a ton and you're dead in a second. On a stupidly simple practical level, the world is physical, and we behave like that all the time. What I'll also say is, if the world didn't behave like this, it couldn't exist as we know it. If the world was like just like a soup of experiences and objects appearing and disappearing and deforming and reforming, it would be, I'm not saying that life couldn't exist, because it might just exist in a way that we can't imagine, but life as you know it, your life couldn't exist. My life couldn't exist. You couldn't wake up in the same bed every day and get up and do the same things all the time if there was no stability and there was no sense of physicality, and if things just lost their shape and their form and their mass all the time, like some kind of like abstract weird painting. The world behaves as it does, and that is a good thing because it helps us live our life. I'll also say that all the physics and all the maths and all the kind of innovation and science that is done based on assuming that objects have mass and they exert force and so on has really transformed human society in extremely powerful ways that we usually take completely for granted. And so clearly there is something right about the paradigm. Clearly there's something to be said for it, right? And clearly beyond the metaphysical implications, there is utility. It's interesting, this is kind of a side point. It's not that far away from what we're talking about, but I remember watching a documentary about quantum physics. I'm not a physicist, but I've studied physics to a reasonable level when I was younger, and I kind of I understand enough to at least sort of watch documentaries like this. I remember it was a documentary on quantum physics that basically once they discovered a lot of the weird quantum properties of electrons and matter and so on, people started asking, what does this mean for our understanding of, physicality and Newtonian physics and the materialistic paradigm and so on. And basically what a lot of physicists said was, well, it doesn't really matter what the implications are because it's extraordinarily powerful. And progressive and sort of anti-establishment physicists like to use this to kind of shit on the establishment and say, well, you're not thinking metaphysically, you just want to sell your inventions to the government, and you want to, you want to get research grants, and you don't really care about, the actual philosophy of it. But actually, isn't utility a proof of its own? It's like in business, for example. Goodness me, I'm going off on tangents, but this is a very powerful point, and I'll make it very explicit in a minute. In business, for example, what matters? Do your dreams matter? Do your ideas about the marketplace matter? Do your ideas about your product and how good it is matter? Or does it matter at the end of the day that you're bringing money in? It's not that the two are completely separate, but ultimately the proof is in how much money are you bringing in. I'm not saying that's the only proof, but it's a very sure way of having sanity, right? And so this is the point I'm making, that the materialistic paradigm is functionally very, very useful. And so we have to take that as proof of something, right? Even if we can poke metaphysical holes in it left, right, and center, there is, we can't deny its utility, and we can't deny that it must be doing something right. Similar point I'm going to make now is that, even if we have some cool idea that the world isn't physical, this is almost like a cliche, and it was actually one of the reasons I was a bit apprehensive about recording this episode. Not just because this is a huge question to ask, but because it would be so easy for me to sit here and just shit on the materialistic paradigm, which so many people love to do. But no matter how kind of progressive, postmodern, and spiritual and new age you identify yourself to be, the fact is that you do everything that I've spoken about here on a basic everyday level. Regardless of how you conceptualize it, you treat the world as if it's physical, and if you didn't, you might be dead by now. Because if you just jumped out the window and said, oh, I can fly, gravity is an illusion, physicality is an illusion, well, good luck with that, friends.